Hello and welcome back. My name is Pedro Pereira. I am the lead of the Sustainability Action Society here at Capital Club Dubai. We are continuing in this conversation about several topics that has sustainability at the center. Today, we will talk about zero emissions. We have high targets from the country to achieve net zero by 2050. Rita, you have a love for learning, and I know that you've been learning a lot about everything related to our emissions, and you are applying that to your job. Can you talk to us about measurement? We cannot change what we cannot measure. So what we have to measure when we talk about carbon emissions, when we talk about emissions in general?
Yeah. So the scope of emissions is very broad and is very ambiguous. You have what we call scope 1, 2, and 3. A lot of companies focus only on scope 1 because it's easy to measure, or scope 2 because it's easy to measure. Scope 1 and 2 is related to utilities and to fossil fuel burning. So the emissions that an exhaust pipe of a car emits, not necessarily all the manufacturing of the fuel, and not necessarily the manufacturing of the vehicle. So it becomes very easy to tap into a utility bill or a gas bill and convert it into CO2, because there's a table from the GG protocol that you can search, and is a straightforward method. Then scope 3 emissions, which is the biggest chunk of it, is the scope 1 emissions of someone else. But scope 3 emissions is related to all the supply chain. So what is the fuel that we are consuming in our vehicles? Where does it coming from? What was the process of transformation of that fuel? What was the manufacturing of the vehicle, and what resources did they use? So the complexity, you can see that it starts to go into many, many layers. And here the GG protocol gives us a light into how to measure it. But it's complex. You need to start to focus on what are the immediate aspects that you control to get really, really good insight. And for this, you can leverage a science tool. It's called life cycle assessment that takes into account all the life cycle of a specific item. But of course, the item itself has other parts that have other parts that have other parts. And so at some point, it's difficult to trace back to the origin. But again, the GG protocol gives you a conversion based on, in a very basic level, you can just translate costs into, based on a specific category, to carbon, although I'm not 100% in favor of that because it's not actionable. But then once you go and start to break down the parts of, imagine that you have the control of manufacturing of that phone, and you can understand what are the minerals, what are the pieces, where they're coming from, you can have a really clear picture of how much emissions that phone produced in order to be made for you. And then you can also measure the energy that it consumes every day, although it's going to be very marginal.
So I understand that to tackle the zero emissions challenge we have ahead of us, we need to work as a network. It's a network game. So is that network only applicable to the large players, or that will affect even the small, medium businesses that are part of different supply chains? Can you explain to us how that will unfold across large, small, medium businesses?
So what is happening in sustainability, and is interesting, is that it's transforming as an important KPI as any financial KPI. So it's starting to come up very strong regulation to control the emissions of every company, especially in Europe with the transaction across border. They're starting to put very strict restrictions around that. So I do feel that it's going to touch everybody. You cannot get away from it. Also from a competitive advantage, not just the big corporates, but also the small ones have a role to play. And potentially the small ones even have more flexibility to adjust to the changes that are coming in terms of sustainability, because they don't have a legacy infrastructure that they need to retrofit. And so is a problem that everybody needs to work on. The small, medium companies, they are the biggest contributor of everything because they are a lot, right? So if you think about a company like Amazon, or you think about all the small, medium companies within Dubai, of course the small, medium companies of Dubai will have a bigger contribution combined than a big corporation. However, we need to work together on that.
Perfect. Now, you spoke many times about GHG, greenhouse gases. Nicholas, I want you to talk to us more about that. Is it only CO2? Is it more than that? What should we be worried about in terms of greenhouse gases?
I guess the marketing out there is all about CO2 because it's a simple thing to understand. Well, I shouldn't say simple because it can be confusing, but I think the main problem is that when you CeCO2, it talks about changing whatever a gas or a problematic gas might be, like methane. How does it equate to one molecule of carbon dioxide? So when everything gets changed into a carbon dioxide equivalent, which is what that E stands for, everyone can focus too much on the CO2 rather than VOCs, which are volatile organic compounds, which come from paints. For me, greenhouse gases, I guess the main ones that we tend to focus on is CO2, methanes, VOCs, and I think if we can tend to reduce them, that's a benefit.
Now we understand better about the problem. Let's get into solutions. What would be potential solutions and where to start? So I would like to hear from both of you. Where do you think we should start? At least to measure, in terms of assessing, so we can optimize using maybe benchmarks. So what is the solution you have in your business, and what do you see solutions in the market overall?
I guess from the side of vehicles, we do a great job with petrol vehicles in Dubai. You get your printout, when you go to register, it gets tested. The big problem is that they use the same method to test diesel vehicles, whereas actually testing diesel vehicles is a completely different thing. You actually need to test for different gases, your particles that are coming out. Now, while Europe might be improving their sort of vehicles and making sure that, I'm not going to get into the difficulties of it, but there's bolt-on products that have been put onto engines now to actually filter out more particulates, change certain gases, make the emissions better. But a lot of the vehicles that get updated in Europe end up coming to the Middle East and Africa. So we get that sort of secondary market. And the big problem here is that all these old vehicles can't make use of biofuels. They actually create more emissions using biofuels than they would in Europe. So companies like Scania that are selling Euro 6 vehicles actually have all these abilities to burn fuel better. So my big thing would be saying that we should be actually testing vehicles each year at registration and making sure that the vehicles are actually tested correctly, like they do in Europe, like they do in Australia. And the other major thing would be also on tyres. Tyres are a big problem. You can get a set of tyres, you can borrow them. There's trucks and companies that will borrow a set of tyres, put them on the truck, get them registered, get the tick of approval, and then put old tyres back on. And they're worn out, and all that sort of rubbing on the road breaks them down even further. So you get a lot of particulates with that problem as well. So I think we need better sort of awareness and structure into testing emissions, and also checking quality of the trucks, and also what the equipment that they're using.
All right. Yeah. Rita, is it only about vehicles, or there is more to emissions that we need to look for solutions?
Everything that you consume has an impact in emissions. Vehicles is a big part, is one that is more studied, I would say. There's a higher maturity understanding of the emissions from specific vehicles because of all the science that is behind. And there is not a lot of understanding of all the supply chain. So if you want to start to track your emissions as a company, and you're just starting now today, go to the GHG protocol, understand which category you fit in, and there's tons of simulation tools available. I'm not sure if SAP has one or not, but there's tons of simulation tools available that you can create a hotspot map of your own businesses by ingesting information of your business activity. Then from there you create those hotspots, and then you start to tackle the biggest chunks, and you start to compare as well with what is available externally and how are the maturity technology potentially impacting the transition of your business. And then from there you just go one layer at a time until a point that you need to go away just from a pure carbon accounting and actually understanding what are the trade-offs you have in terms of waste, in terms of pollution, because it's not that we pollute here and we compensate with Amazon in Brazil. Is about both. I think both need to work together, because otherwise there's an imbalance, and people are unhealthy, and there is a big problem in the ecosystem here as well in terms of biodiversity.
Well, sounds great. Now, I see opportunities with net zero. And I want to deep dive on that for us to help our audience to understand, as a leader, how they should react to that. Is this entire story a cost center, or that could become a profit center? So there is desirability in the market for sustainable products, sustainable services. Governments and investors are throwing money on organizations that are really looking for solutions to this global issue and the crisis that they see ahead of us that will risk economies. So now, what are the opportunities? What would you recommend to the entrepreneurs, to the small, medium businesses, to the executives that are watching us right now to tackle sustainability as the biggest opportunity of their lifetime?
So if you go at the macro level, a polluted environment creates tons of health concerns, which in the end is much more costly. So sometimes there is a misunderstanding on directly measuring the cost of investing in an electric vehicle, for example, versus the transition that will incur in the future. So as a government standpoint, it's a cost avoidance to invest in sustainability in the future. As a small company, is an innovation opportunity and is a competitive advantage that you gain. Now, you don't want to be a Kodak, right? I don't know if Kodak, did not want to evolve to the digital area, and still have a very big hotspot for them, but they are gone. So we don't want to be losing the innovation and the competitive advantage. And you have opportunities again because you are more flexible to understand what are changes and test and pilot without creating a lot of risk. And then partner again with medium-sized, big-sized companies and governments to bring solutions up to scale. So yeah, everybody needs to work together on that.
Now I'm going to ask them one thing that will be very important. If they had only one thing they could do to achieve net zero, what would that be? So,
oof, that's a tough one. One thing, there's not one thing that you...
One thing.
But as a person?
If you think as a person you can do one thing to get to net zero, would be great. But I suspect that this is going to be like a collaboration, a network approach.
As a government, you need to implement a very strong holistic policy around emissions. If there is a strong policy with associated taxes and fees, everybody will be forced to change. It's not just a bottoms-up approach and having a minority trying to have the risk of testing and failing and the other one sitting back and hoping for something to come out. Right? Everybody must take action. So I feel that policy is the thing that I would change, but more strict, maybe inspiring on what Europe is doing and put twofold on it. And
yeah, not to copycat, but I know it's a little bit more in my sort of wheelhouse of what I guess why I came here today or why you invited me is more about emissions. But it's been a big thing, I guess, to focus on that. Even if we came up to the levels of other countries at the moment, we would move 20 years. There's countries that have the same policies that we have that moved away 20 years ago. And Dubai is an amazing place. I've lived here 14 years. Sheikh has these visions on set things that's like, let's do it now. I spoke to you about the bicycle track, Al Qudra. He spoke to us on the morning and said, we need to get a bicycle track. I'll have someone call you. 6 months later, it was done. And not done in what people sort of see as typical, where we build these tall buildings and we want to be all show. He was very, very aware of the environment, around it and making sure that got planted out, which is what you see now, lakes and walkways and trees being planted. So I think if we do the same thing and focus on, Tajil with the emissions and with, Dubai Carbon, I've spoken to them a number of times, about just tweaking certain things and getting the testing equipment in just to test the vehicles and sort of make sure that they go out and they're fine for the next year. I think that's a critical thing. So it's once again, measurement. If you don't measure, it doesn't move.
So you heard everybody. It's about government regulation and also the motivation for the leadership to take action. So if you're seeking with your business to become a future leader in everything you do, you better start now incorporating sustainability to help you achieve net zero and develop competitive advantages that will help you become the future leader that you are looking for. Rita, Nicholas, thank you very much for your time. It was a wonderful conversation, and I hope people will be inspired from both of you and contact you for more information. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in the next episode of our Sustainability Action Society, the conversations here at Capital Club Dubai. Thank you.
Thank you.